As a white male attending engineering school in Vermont, I was very much in the majority. However, that doesn't mean there weren't times that you might say I was the diversity. In our freshman kind of initial engineering like discipline focused class, which for me being a civil engineer was a combination of civil and environmental engineering, which is kind of designed to both kind of give you an idea of what the field is and show you a little bit of the design process and get you designing something, which is the fun part of engineering, before you have 2 years of like just like learning all the background you need to actually do something. And I have questionable utility, I think, of that class as, despite other than maybe letting environmental engineers know that it's not what they think it is. We were tasked with the local municipality wanted a composting toilet for their rec field. So we were tasked with coming up with a couple designs. And this project, which was a group project, was structured in kind of 2 phases. One was you had to, with your group, come up with 3 designs that you could then, after an initial presentation to the class, decide to focus on whichever one you determined was the best, and then do a more complete design of that preferred alternative. And so after our group meets and we come up with our designs and we go to the presentation, and me living in a house with a composting toilet and having seen my dad build a couple of them and seen more of them, I came up with 3 different home-built designs for my group. And I did a lot of the kind of design aspect of it, and especially the background of it, because I had that knowledge. But my group certainly did their fair share of the project. And then we go to the presentation, and we're the only group with any home-built designs. Everyone else has 3 different varieties of like a commercial home-scale composting toilet. And that made me feel really bad, because I had completely overlooked the idea of any kind of commercial designs. And while I'm glad that we had a home-built design in our options, or even 2 of them, because there's different ways you can build a home-built composting toilet, it felt really bad that I totally missed that whole other side. Because when these presentations, and especially once we got to the final, they were competitive with our design. Like, it wasn't that the home built was going to be like way cheaper or way better in any way. Like, it doesn't mean it was the only reasonable option when you looked at them. The commercial designs as they were put together were certainly competitive, depending how you ranked your, I guess, decision matrix, or just kind of what factors you considered more important. It's certainly possible that these other groups had initially thought of home-built designs as an option. It's, I think, fairly common in this area on the Long Trail system. There's kind of home-built composting toilets in other places as well, but they couldn't design it. I was talking with another member of my group, and that is initially what he thought of was a home-built design, but I was able to bring the design resources that just aren't available. I used some books that we have that gave me enough kind of background to be able to like give some like numbers to back up a design, rather than just guessing, saying, I've seen it looks about this, but the design, that those resources, those books, I couldn't find anything online. Those books were the only source, and those books weren't in our university's library. It was only stuff that I had because my parents had built a house and had gotten these books, and I don't know where they found them, but it wasn't something that was readily available. And kind of one of the things when this whole project, we had our final presentations, and we were supposed to present to the client, but that ended up not happening. My professor later told me that our design was kind of the most preferred by the client when it was eventually presented to the client. And that's because that's what the client was thinking of, was a home-built design. And like, that's kind of where his mind was. And so initially I felt really good, like, yay, I figured out what the client wanted, and kind of like I was able to deduce a home-built design from the requirements, which were a rather like large set of requirements that we had to design to. And I think they were designed based on what kind of the client was thinking of as for a composting toilet. But to be honest, it wasn't that good that it isn't good to think, oh, I designed for what the client was thinking of, because that's not the point of engineering. The point of engineering is to get the best design for the requirements. And certainly requirements like are often shaped in such a way, or they aren't necessarily intentionally shaped, but just the way their requirements are shaped towards a very specific solution. But it doesn't necessarily need to be exactly what you're initially thinking of. It's actually like you want to explore all the options which meet the requirement, which is kind of the intent of having those initial like 3 options to get us to make sure we're thinking of multiple different things rather than just going with our initial thought. But you want to then design for whatever the true requirements are to get the best design for that requirement. And to be honest, the commercial designs, they were potentially the best option. And again, we didn't have an exact decision matrix that we had to decide between each of the groups which was the best, but depending on what you valued, those commercial options, the pricing was very rough for all of us. So comparing the design options between the different groups was really difficult on the price side of things, just because we're freshman engineering students. Like, we don't know how to price something, and we were just really throwing numbers at the wall. In this kind of design project, though my experiences allowed our group to have a fundamentally different design than everyone else, thus providing some diversity to those designs, we weren't any less segmented than anyone else with just our 3 options in our initial design development of being all home built, which is, in my opinion, just as segmented as the non-home built design people. And I honestly feel worse because we had just as much opportunity to be non-home built designs as them, whereas they didn't have as much opportunity to develop a home built design as we did.